Hello, everyone. Welcome to session 5A, Supervising Staff Virtually, Discovering Innovative Methods to Assist Staff and Students Working Remotely During the COVID-19 Pandemic. My name is Danielle Spolenka, and I am a member of the MAC 2021 Program Committee. Before I turn it over to our session presenters, I'd like to go over a few logistical details. This webinar is being recorded and will be made available for viewing in approximately 2 weeks. Please use the Zoom Q&A feature to submit your questions. This session will also have the chat feature enabled, which you are free to use to make comments or share relevant information with your colleagues. But we ask that you try to direct questions to the Q&A so they aren't missed. I would also like to share with you MAC's expectations for conduct, and I'll be sharing that link with you and that document in the chat shortly. By participating in the session, you agree to engage respectfully with the presenter and other session participants. Any type of harassing or disruptive behavior is prohibited, including but not limited to abusive or derogatory comments, slurs or epithets, threats or acts of violence, intimidation, misgendering, or excessive comments not pertinent to the topic at hand. We will be monitoring the chat throughout the webinar, and if anyone engages in harassing or disruptive behavior, that person will be removed. Thank you very much for following these guidelines. And finally, you are welcome and encouraged to share your conference experience via social media. I will be adding the chat into the chat suggested conference hashtags for this session. So thank you, and I will turn it over to our presenters.
Hi, everyone. My name is April Anderson-Zorn, and I'm the University Archivist at Illinois State University. If you give me just a second, I'm going to share my screen so we can get you our wonderful slides. Here we go. So again, welcome to our session, Supervising Staff Virtually. Oops, sorry, give me 1 second. I'm going to stop my video. Supervising Staff Virtually, Discovering Innovative Methods to Assist Staff and Students Working Remotely During the COVID-19 Pandemic. We have got several great presenters here today. We are doing a lightning round. So if you would, please, as you hear our presentations, put your questions in the Q&A, and we'll be happy to answer those questions in the Q&A. I will briefly introduce the presenters as they are up to do their presentations. And since I happen to have Anderson in my name, I'm going to go first. So here I am, April K. Anderson-Zorn, Shifting Conversations. And like I said, I am the University Archivist at Illinois State University, located in Normal, Illinois. And I have to say, we just today announced our 20th president, the first female president in our history of over 160 years. I'm very excited. So my presentation will look at what started out as normal in-house projects happening in my facility, but then COVID hit. And we had to shift to different models of communication, which helped us not only inform how we work with our students remotely, but how we can interact with our interns and volunteers going forward in the future. So again, the name of my presentation is Shifting Conversations, Moving In-Person Projects to a Virtual World. So just a quick setup, I won't necessarily go into the projects themselves, and I'm just going to focus on two in particular where these interactions really hit home for us. We received in 2019 for the 2019-2020 fiscal year 2 grants, one from Society of American Archivists Foundation to create Wikipedia pages for underrepresented archivists, so Black archivists, women archivists, LGBTQ archivists, create those Wikipedia pages for them where they did not have that representation. And also at my university, something we call a URG or University Research Grant to create Wikipedia pages for our university presidents. Each of these grants hired graduate students to do work to create these Wikipedia pages during the fiscal year. And what I have been calling sort of anecdotally before times, so BC times and then AC times after COVID times. In the BC times, we regularly, and I'm sure many of you, we regularly had in-person weekly meetings. And I'm actually located 3 miles off campus, north of campus. So I would meet with students either in office or I would meet with them on campus in between classes when it was easier for them to buy them a cup of coffee and just check in with them and see how their project was going. We also really required of a lot of our students to be in person at our facility to do that work, since a lot of it was so hands-on and doing hands-on research, which also led to in-office interactions. So when they were there, they had in-office questions. They could pop into my office and ask me questions very quickly, and I could answer them very quickly. And of course, like all projects have project deadlines. My students and I in particular am very project management oriented. And I say, all right, we've got these deadlines that we need to meet through the course of your internship, which not only if it's an internship or it's a grant project, if it's an internship, they get a grade. So this is how we grade them, but particularly with a grant project to meet those deadlines and meet those expectations. So there, of course, were deadlines through the semester. Well, then we hit AC times. Then we hit after COVID. And I'm talking really specifically in the weeks following COVID, where students were just coming back after that spring break period in mid-March and very quickly had to, like the rest of our faculty, adapt and adjust to Zoom. Had to do, for our campus, it was Zoom and do Zoom classes. And frankly, we were all obviously overwhelmed, but our students in particular were incredibly overwhelmed. And my example has been one student who has since graduated, but she was so overwhelmed, I kind of became her therapist. She cried on one Zoom meeting because she just could not keep up with the massive change that she had encountered, particularly the isolation that she was encountering because she wasn't even home with her family. And here she was stuck in her tiny apartment with poor Wi-Fi, trying to complete all these course projects and do our project as well. So I threw, first of all project deadlines went out the window. There was just extraordinary circumstances. I wasn't going to put that pressure on those students to meet those project deadlines. Those in-person meetings that we were having on a regular basis then turned to Zoom meetings, and that wasn't for everybody. Where in the beginning, it seemed like the world was now a Zoom world, and we really tried to do everything through Zoom. It just didn't fit every student. And those students in particular, the two that I referred to on each one of these projects, one actually texted me regularly, and that was her comfortable mode of communication. And the other one called, used an actual telephone, and communicated with me that way. So really, I left it up to the student to tell me what they felt comfortable doing in terms of communication. But I also asked that they communicated with me on a regular basis, at least keep me up to date with what was going on. And obviously, as with all of these things during COVID, some project objectives were altered in the process. These were Wikipedia projects, so I also wanted the students to go into Wikidata and do some Wikidata work. That was completely tossed out, and that will be done at a later date. But at least the main project objectives were eventually met. And in fact, I, in the end, with outcomes and future of what we're doing, that flexibility allowed those students to not only meet their project goals and deadlines, one of them, in fact, thrived. She was able to completely rework her schedule. And instead of for SAA in particular, the 15 Wikipedia pages that we sought to get done, she ended up doing 40. So she had the ability to make that work within the schedule that she was now having to work with. And also really appreciated with me having that flexibility to text me and knew when my office hours were and could text me during the office hours. So flexibility, even if it's a little inconvenient for you. And I was heavily pregnant at the time, so I was really trying to make this work for my students. I was flexible, but still firm. Pick a communication style that worked for that student, whether again, it's text, telephone, Zoom, whatever that is, but also let them know they can contact you, or they were contacting me when they knew I was in my office, quote unquote, that was my home office, during a certain window of time. But if they needed to meet at 5:30, they needed to meet at 7 o'clock at night, we could certainly work that out, and I could work it into my schedule. So current internships and what we expect to do with further grant and internships, they're hybrid. I've had students in the office currently this semester, in fact, and had a pretty successful semester with our interns, going through and sitting in an office in their own space, but then doing part of that work at home. They kind of backfill that work and can do some of that work at home. But again, knowing their communication style that they prefer, knowing when they could communicate with me, and still being flexible about those deadlines, but at the same time, knowing that they still have that expectation of keeping up that communication portion of the work that they need to complete. So with that, that is what we did at ISU Archives. I'm going to lead it off next to Neal. And Neal, I'll go ahead and present you. He is doing Keeping Everyone Working. Neal is the digital archivist at Purdue University Archives and Special Collections. His presentation, Keeping Everyone Working, Creating, Managing, and Assessing Remote Projects, will discuss takeaways from leading remote work projects across his unit and others. So Neal, there you go, take it away.
Great, thanks, April. So ready to go on to next slide. So like many of you in March 2020, we knew we were going to be working remotely. And so in our unit, we had started to do a little bit of planning for this, but by the last week of March 2020, we had to go remote, including everyone within the libraries at school, which we were a part of. So within our unit, that meant creating projects and maintaining workflows for 20 persons, staff, faculty, and student employees in our unit. And then there was a call and a need for up to 75 persons for outside of our unit within the libraries and School of Information Studies that might need work to do remotely. And this would impact, of course, people who work at service desks, students predominantly, but also full-time staff members. So we discussed this internally at the time and realized that we were uniquely situated to provide a lot of scalable web-based projects that people could work on remotely. But scaling this up needed to happen really quickly. So thankfully, one of the things that I had maintained and several others in our unit is like this list of someday projects. And I'm sure we're no different than that. So that's what we've sort of hung our hat on as we moved forward. Next slide, please. So a couple of those someday projects were two smaller projects related to catalog review and control vocabularies. So these were a couple of quick projects related to reviewing some titles that maybe we were hopeful would be transferred to the archives from other holdings in the libraries, as well as looking at subject terminology in the catalog. And those projects were not managed by me, by others inside the archives. But I think it's another example of how projects can be large or small, and things that we normally do can become really useful remote projects with the resources we have available. I did manage a few other projects and sort of trying to pivot that direction. All of these projects involved a lot of communication. With the supervisors of the students and the staff who were doing this work, administrators who were curious how things were going, and project members, including the persons actually doing the work on these projects, to maintain productivity, continuity, and sort of feel like they were part of the team. So I sort of felt like I was the connective tissue that sort of kept some of these projects going, and I'm sure others can relate to that. And so we maintained and opened up multiple conversational methods. We got very familiar with Zoom, we got very familiar with Teams, like many others, and we met people basically where they were to discuss these things with them. So whether they were comfortable with voice, chat, Teams, video, phone, that is sort of the role I took on in trying to manage some of these projects and make sure people felt they understood what was going on, and to maintain that connection with them while they're working on it. Next slide, please. So the biggest project that I managed was a large-scale text correction project of our student newspaper, The Exponent, which we had digitized and placed online with the vendor a few years ago. And it had been one of those someday projects, and the public can volunteer to text correct. But we knew that there was a large research need to review, particularly those issues outside of copyright that the public and our staff and students were using and instructors were using in their courses. So what we decided to do was to scale this up really quickly and have all the non-ASC undergraduate student workers work on this text correction project. And we took advantage of the communication resources I just mentioned, as well as Box and Teams to share that documentation. So I wrote documentation, created sign-up sheets, communication methodologies, and communicated with supervisors, along with the associate head of our department, sort of brought students in to the project, introduced them to it, made them feel comfortable with what was going on, and gave them an opportunity to talk to each other as they worked on the project. The other important thing that I did at the very beginning, which I think is an important takeaway, is I created an assessment method for at the very beginning, so I could assess the number of individuals each day who were working on the project that I was aware of, and then the number of completed corrections, or by text block is what we decided to use, each day. So that allowed me to report out to the supervisors of those students, and as well as to the administration, how the progress was going on the project. Next slide, please. So ultimately, this project is continuing today. We do have a few people still working on it part-time, as students and staff have continued to work remotely. Over the course of from late March to August, when our unit returned to campus and most people were back working in their facilities, we corrected about 100,000 text blocks, about 73,000 text blocks up till, and we've done about 24,000 since then. This represents just 1% of all of the text blocks, but it's still an achievement that we would not have been able to reach. And most importantly, we were able to keep students employed during those last few critical months of that spring 2020 semester, as well as staff members. Next slide, please. So near and dear to my heart, of course, and many of ours, is archives of special collections. So while I was working with the supervisors and students and administration on projects outside of the archives, inside the archives, our own students and staff needed to continue working. So we took advantage of some of the same methodologies, utilized Box for documentation spaces, worked on networking, getting into network drives remotely from home, things of that nature, and tried to continue those projects that we could when we were working on site, with some limitations, of course. But we worked exclusively remotely up until August of 2020. Excuse me, yeah, August of 2020, that was right. So whenever possible, we tried to work on remote projects that students were really comfortable with, like oral history transcription review, metadata for digital collections, working in archive space to review subject terms or copy editor, things of that nature. Meanwhile, full-time staff continued to work on our own recurring responsibilities and modified them like many did as we needed to. Next slide, please. So I supervise a lot of students in my unit, and some of the things I did to make the students feel like they could be successful was establishing a lot of new expectations and lines of communication, and not changing or lowering expectations, but just letting them know it was okay to ask for a week off, or to know to ask more questions. So because their lives, like our own, were going undergo massive changes. Several of them were getting ready to graduate at the end of the spring of 2020. And so a lot of changes were happening. So I kept in touch with them regularly via email. I had bi-weekly meetings. We talked about work. We talked about classes. We kept in touch. That really seemed to help productivity. And I also always email the students once a week as a group to let them know new updates about our unit, as well as what I knew about campus changes that I could communicate to them, and made them aware of resources that were being made available to students as well. So all of those things were very important. And I think ultimately worked quite well. Next slide, please. So finally, a few takeaways that I wanted to note is, I said planning for everything is improbable. I didn't want to use the word impossible, but it's very difficult. Of course, this has been a time where we had to adapt a great deal. So I've sort of learned that I need to plan to adapt. So like we had done, we continue to grow and maintain a list of potential projects. And now thinking about how diversifying them, about where we could possibly do them, hybrid, remote, on-site. The assessment component that I talked about with the text correction project, I've implemented with many other projects. It's been very helpful. And not just knowing how much we've accomplished, but asking for resources later. And then documentation and agility are very important. And as I've noted, a lot of communication methods, meeting people where they were, was I think enabled us to be successful with the dozens of persons who worked on several projects with ours. And I had to learn or relearn every day to be patient with myself and of course with others. So all those things I think added up to a successful remote project period, and people are still working remote today. And it's been going quite well with just keeping these things in mind. Next slide, please. And thank you very much.
Sorry about that, everybody. Let me just previously on. There we go. Sarah Lebovitz, she is next. Sarah Lebovitz is the Service Employees International Union, or SEIU, archivist at the Walter P. Reuther Library, Archives of Labor and Urban Affairs at Wayne State University in Detroit, Michigan. Her presentation is titled Pivot, Shifting Students to Remote Work. Sarah, take it away.
Thank you. Thank you so much, April, for the introduction and also for saying it in that way. I appreciate that a lot. I won't repeat too much of what April said other than to say, hi, I'm Sarah Lebovitz. I'm a labor union archivist, and I'm going to talk briefly about the work my colleagues and I did at the Reuther Library to quickly create projects and pivot students to remote work. Next slide, please. Before getting into the work we did, I'd like to provide some more information on the Reuther as an archive. The Walter P. Reuther Library, Archives of Labor and Urban Affairs is part of the Wayne State University library system in Detroit, Michigan, and is one of the largest labor archives in the world. We also serve as the official archive for Wayne State University, and we collect records documenting the political and community life of urban and metropolitan Detroit. As the only archive on Wayne State's campus, the Reuther regularly hosts students from the Wayne State University School of Information Sciences, particularly students in their archival administration program. We have a yearly compensated internship tied to the university collections and the university archivist called the Ronald Raven Award. And in 2020, my colleague Shay Rafferty and I hosted our first graduate student assistant in special project hours at the Reuther to give him experience in processing archival collections. So in total, we had 3 supervisors overseeing 2 students in early 2020 who both had requirements in their positions to fulfill a certain number of hours. Next slide, please. One of the first things we did prior to the full shutdown of the Reuther was to let our GSA know that he was not required to come into the building and that his safety came first for us as supervisors. Once we reinforced this as a baseline, we discussed the potential for remote work options during the few weeks we thought we'd be out of the building. When classes switched to being fully remote, Wayne State made sure students were equipped with stable internet and devices they needed, so we knew remote projects would actually be feasible. The archivist, supervising student work all met together to generate these options, and we discussed a few overall goals. First was acknowledging that we wanted to set up projects that would be more than just busy work. We wanted to give students projects that would help grow their skill sets and keep them engaged in archival practice. We also decided to set up continual check-ins for our students, not just to see how their work was going, but also to provide a personal connection and outlet. The constant communication allowed us to adjust where needed if projects had to be paused for any reason, and we reinforced with the students that they never were required to give us an explanation. Another goal, which helped shape the projects themselves, was to work to improve and enhance our descriptive practices, which I'll jump into while we talk about the projects. Next slide, please. So there were 2 main projects we decided on with the students that we felt added to their skills and understanding, and that also had no set deadlines. The first was a metadata and quality assurance project in Archive.it, which the Reuther first started using in January 2020, which was very lucky looking back. First steps were to get an idea of the students' experience and understanding of web archiving and provide additional information as needed. We gave introductory sessions over Teams, which felt incredibly new and unique at the time for both of the students, that walked them through using the staff interface. And we also created some introductory documents with recommended reading on web archiving and links to Archive.it documentation. We also discussed preferred methods of communication and decided for this project to try out Trello as a more streamlined way of assigning tasks and checking in on the status of different websites, since we were all being inundated with emails. We also encouraged students to be open about anything that wasn't working in order to streamline the workflows that we ourselves were putting into place as we were learning about Archive.it. The second project was a reconciliation project, mainly in archive space, which revolved around work the Reuther staff had done in 2019 to shift our discovery platform from the Reuther's Drupal site with finding aids attached as PDFs to the A-Space Public User Interface, or PUI. We really wanted to ensure that no important information had been lost during the shift. My colleague and I generated and compared lists between the Drupal site and the PUI and created a shared Excel spreadsheet for students to refer to and to track the work being done. Students were given access to the A-Space staff interface and had permissions enabled to create subject headings and agents and edit according to our standards. For this project, we really encouraged them to think holistically about description and apply their professional judgment, with the understanding that we would be there to review their decisions and have further conversation if they felt unsure about what they were doing. Both projects heavily involved work with Library of Congress authorities and also prompted some conversation about local authority conventions that we have at the Reuther. Next slide, please. So to sum up how things went, Trello was great for creating a shared space to assign and keep track of who was working on what. It also allowed students to work at their own pace and visualize what step they needed to take next with certain websites. Another success was the conversation that happened between supervisors and students. We really got more time to talk to them about what they wanted in their careers, but we also got to provide some emotional support and additional support for each other. Michigan was under very strict lockdown until June, so being able to see other people and check in with them was incredibly beneficial to all parties involved. A final success was that the students were able to gain some new practical skills in web archiving, as well as learn about other ways to provide access to information online. Both students wrote blog posts related to their work over the semester that were posted to the Reuther's website. So some learning opportunities definitely included our shared communication methods. Yes, they kept us from over emailing each other, but they did put a lot of pressure on the supervisors to continue updating tasks, especially since the students worked through the project way faster than we were expecting. We had to scramble a bit to keep up with them. And going to remote work required adjusted skill sets for us too. So that was a bit of a learning curve. Another takeaway was learning when a call truly could just be a walkthrough document in an email, which learning that served us well in the future as remote work became just regular work. We found that it can be way less mentally taxing to ask for additional clarification than it can sometimes be to sit through a screen share walkthrough of something. A big final learning takeaway was that it's really important to be explicit in a project's purpose and end goal. The students were very enthusiastic and very excited to get the chance to keep working, but sometimes strayed out of scope of the projects and created additional work for themselves. Overall, I'm really proud of the pivot that staff and students did during the initial shutdown, and am glad that we were able to provide a safe alternative to working in person. We will likely continue using some of these methods moving forward. Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah. Next on our list is Rebecca Skirvin. She has, is the coordinator of archives and special collections at North Central College in Naperville, Illinois. Rebecca is presenting COVID and Beyond, Rethinking Remote Archives Work in a Small Liberal Arts College. Take it away.
Hi, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. If we could move on to the next slide, and then the next slide. So a couple of months ago, when we were all marking the first anniversary of the COVID-19 pandemic, a question was making the rounds on social media. When did the pandemic become real to you? And for me, the answer to that question is when I saw this tweet in early March. What's the plan for our student employees? And that really made me sit up and take notice, in part because I'm a loan arranger and I rely heavily on student workers to do things that keep the archives going, such as processing and basic reference. But it was also because of the particular demographics of the college that I work at. Next slide, please. So North Central College in Naperville, Illinois is a small private liberal arts college with about 3,000 students. Most of them are undergraduates. Almost all of our students come in with some kind of financial aid, and we're located in a relatively expensive part of the country in the Chicago suburbs. We have an increasing number of commuter, transfer, and non-traditional students. And about 40% of our students are first generation college students, which mean that neither of their parents have a college degree. So for those of you who, like me, did not understand the effect that being a first generation college student can have on the college experience, I'll just say really briefly that based on research that's been done on this and what I've observed on my own campus, first generation students often have to be explicitly taught that it's okay to ask questions and it's okay to ask for help. And in a global crisis, I didn't want to wait for my student workers, both of whom were first generation college students, both of whom relied on their jobs for money to live on, and one of whom was immunocompromised, to have to remember to ask me for help. I also didn't want to just wait for the college to tell us what to do with student workers. I knew I needed to be proactive. So in the brief period of time between seeing the tweet on the previous slide, which is, I think it was March 6th, And then when our college finally suspended in-person instruction on March 16th, so about 10 days, I brainstormed projects that my student workers could do remotely. Because I wanted to be able to make the case to my library director, to human resources, and anyone else at the college that my student workers could work remotely and that they deserve the opportunity to be able to do so. Next slide, please. So on this slide, you can see the kinds of tasks I came up with. They're very familiar. Several of my colleagues in previous presentations have mentioned them. So one was updating archive space finding aids. And it was very lucky that I was in the middle of migrating our finding aids from Word documents to archive space. So in that 10 days between realizing that I needed to think about student workers working remotely and when the college went remote, I wrote up directions and trained my student workers on how to use archive space. Also, both our college newspaper and our yearbooks are available online in full text searchable databases. So those were available for my workers to use remotely to build up a reserve of social media posts based on interesting things that they found. And then one of my student workers was able to rethink an exhibit he had planned for National Poetry Month in April to suit the confines of Instagram. But just as important as coming up with tasks was having the right tools to use and for me to have the right attitude to make it work. We could not have done this without archive space or something like it, or without a file sharing service like Box or Dropbox. And it was especially important since we were not seeing each other on a regular basis throughout the week to use the video conferencing service the college provided for us, which was Microsoft Teams, to chat weekly, even if it was just to connect and remind each other that we were still on the same team and working towards the same goal. I also made sure to keep at the front of my mind that my goals were to keep them working and to watch out for their well-being as best as I could. And I did my best to communicate those goals to them in the month and a half that we worked remotely together. Both of my student assistants were seniors. They graduated at the beginning of May. So this really was about getting them to that finishing point. Next slide, please. So my college is planning to return to full in-person instruction in the fall, and I am in the process of hiring 2 new student workers, one of whom has already started and the second of whom will start right before classes start in August. But I'm not thinking about this as a return to normal. I'm still keeping remote work options like finding aid cleanup, social media prep, digital exhibit material prep, metadata cleanup, and website cleanup in the back of my mind. I've formulated a remote work policy, and I've told students in interviews that while the student worker position is largely in person, there is the possibility of remote work under certain circumstances like life events, inclement weather, extended absences, that sort of thing. In part, this is because, as the world scientists have reminded us, there is every reason to expect that unless we take measures to change it, we can't expect more pandemics like COVID-19. But even if we don't have another event like COVID in our lifetimes, for me, as the student population at my school moves further away from the traditional 18 to 21-year-old single person profile, having flexible options like remote work is actually really important for attracting and retaining student workers in the archives. And I'm doing my best to keep on top of new technology for remote work so that I can proactively integrate them into remote work contingency plans. For me, it no longer takes the prospect of a global disaster to make me consider remote work as a part of my student worker plans. And hopefully some of you will consider it as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Rebecca. Next on our list is Anne Stensel. Anne and her student workers are successfully digitizing many different formats of historic material. Anne's work involves preserving and providing access to historical information that includes images, audio, video, text, and more about Minnesota State University, Mankato, and South Central Minnesota, and ARC, the University Archives digital collections. In addition, Anne helps to maintain the University Records Center that provides temporary university storage and assists as needed in the University Archives and Southern Minnesota Historical Center. So next on the list is Anne. Anne, take it away.
Thanks, April. You can just go ahead and stay right there for now. As April said, I'm Anne Stenzel. I work at Minnesota State University, Mankato. We're a mid-sized university in South Central Minnesota, about an hour and a half south of Minneapolis, St. Paul. And our enrollment is about 14 to 15,000 per year. I'm going to tell you straight up that I completely changed my script this morning, so I might be going rogue. My coworkers are used to this, but you might not be. So next slide. I worked at MSU for quite some time, since 2000, in a variety of roles in the library, but I worked in the University Archives since 2002. And in addition to other tasks, my primary focus is ARCH, our University Archives digital collections. And I also maintain an offsite temporary records management storage site that our students, we work in person in that site as well. The University Archives is comprised of 2 librarians, my supervisor, the University Archives, and the Digital Initiatives librarian, my coworker, who's also a technician, and we directly co-supervise 3 University Archives student workers. And all 3 of our student workers have been working with us for 2 to 3 years, and they work on an average of 15 to 20 hours per week. And all 3 are graduating in spring 2022. Sad. So we'll be hiring a couple of new student workers this fall, 2021. I'm pretty good at generating busy work and tasks for student workers, so much so that the University Archives has been providing tasks to library student workers that are outside of the University Archives since I think about 2012, and I'll talk more about that later. But yes, let's talk about our scheduling. I had to go back to my way back calendar, or as April called BC, before COVID, to find all these dates. And I think that I'm pretty confident about what we were doing. I flew back to Minnesota from our Florida condo in March 11th, 2020. And somebody else, was it Rebecca that talked about, that's when the pandemic became real, when my husband and I were sitting in the airport at Atlanta. We were making a connection there, and I saw people wearing masks, and we were wiping everything down, and it was kind of a scary time. But I feel like things have since calmed down for us. Our university declared that our spring break would expand by an additional week to allow for preparations to complete the semester completely remotely. And as I'm sure all of you experienced, it was a mad scramble. By March 18th, I was working remotely, and it was something I'd never done before. And our 4 student workers at the time joined us remotely to work remotely by the week of March 23rd. So it was kind of crazy. And my one student worker graduated in May of 2020. It was her last semester, and I'm going to be honest, she struggled emotionally. She had lost a lot of her connections. She ended up moving home, and she was really involved in some major student activities, and she really noticed the loss of that. And like I think April said, that she became kind of a therapist to her student workers, and I have many of those same experiences myself. And I do remember, yes, one day she cried, and I felt really badly for her, but she was able to be successful in what she was working on. And I guess I gave her a lot of grace, and I just tried to be really patient with her, because sometimes when something like that is happening, everybody reacts differently, and we just have to be patient and allow those things to happen as they do. And over the summer, I'm going to say that we continue to work remotely. We only have 1 student worker at that time. And like many other archives around the nation, our university archives, we embarked on a COVID-19 community history project that employed 100 plus international students. But I'm not going to waste your time talking about that project, because I think that there's plenty of other sessions that are covering that topic, including my coworkers that talked about our project yesterday. But our summer student worker did provide a lot of support for that project over the summer. Beginning in August 2020, that one student worker and I expanded our physical workspaces to provide for adequate social distancing in our work areas. So everybody's about 12 feet apart. So we feel pretty comfortable working in the building at our workspaces. I'm sorry, we're on a new slide. I'm sorry, April, I totally spaced that out. And I would say that you know what? No, I was wrong. Can we go back to the last slide? I apologize. Okay. So in the fall of 2020, we and our student workers, we worked every day in the building for 6 weeks in the building with our new socially distanced workspace. I had about 1 to 2 students working with me at that time. So, I mean, we were all gung ho, and most of my students were attending classes in a hybrid model at that time. We then did a phased return to remote work that would begin on Thanksgiving 2020 to coincide with the university working 100% remote to end the fall semester. And then starting in January 2021 to the end of the semester, we started working a hybrid work schedule, which is Monday and Wednesday in the building with Thursdays and Fridays remote. And will this remote hybrid model continue here at Minnesota State Mankato? We don't know. The jury's still out. We're waiting on administration guidance at this time. And hopefully we're going to know more by June or July. But after yesterday's CDC guidance, I'm even more unsure. I don't know what's happening. I got lots of cognitive dissonance happening right here. So and I'm sure everybody else is feeling the exact same way. So I guess like the title of my presentation, we're pivoting. We have to be flexible. Okay, next slide. Now is the next slide. So the other thing that I wanted to talk about is our tasks. And pretty much like everybody else in the world, we're forced into a remote world, which provided challenging. I found myself learning lots of new technology like everybody else, and in turn, sharing my newfound tools with others and taking advantage of professional development opportunities. And in the early days, I found myself encouraging my student workers to complete a lot of online professional development training in lieu of our regular work, just to buy me some time while we gather some suitable remote tasks. Unfortunately, or rather fortunately, depends on how you look at it, we had just completed a very large metadata cleanup project in our digital collections. A perfect remote job, but it was complete. So I had to find other tasks. And in supervising student workers for over 20 years, I value input and suggestions from them. They're great at figuring out tasks to do, and they're great at coming up with ways to do things. And together we figured out an awful lot. We continue to work remotely, and another example, so I would say an example of some of the changes that we made is in our negative digitization workflow process. Pre-pandemic, our digitization workflow was to log on paper, scan, ingest, and move to digital storage in that order. And in August, we revamped that workflow process to log an online log, scan to Teams, move to digital storage only in preparation of ingesting to our digital collections. We accomplished this by scanning 2,000 negatives in the fall and focusing on ingesting these during their remote work time. Next slide. So communication, I would say that for us, we're a Microsoft campus, and luckily we were prodded into starting using Microsoft Teams in fall of 2019. We didn't really like it, but at that time, we now realize that it was invaluable because we already had experience in working with Microsoft Teams. And we were able to coordinate our files and all of our communication through Teams, and we still use that an awful lot. What I may have used as an email in the past, we often will use Microsoft Teams now. And we, even when we're working in the building, because we have spaces on 3 or 4 floors within the library, sometimes we're still communicating on Teams with students that are still in the building. We also, I will say this, that we use it for funny things. We update on projects. My students love a great archives meme. They love to use photos from our digital collections, just like this one, to create a really funny meme. We don't share them publicly, but yeah, they're good stuff. And I would say that when my students are working remotely, I'm going to video call them, or as my supervisor would say, a proof of life discussion. And also, so I mean, we would talk 5-10 minutes, you know, what are you doing? Do you have any questions? What do you need? Is there anything I can help you with? So I think that's been really valuable. And I feel like I've learned a lot as a supervisor. And just because we're working remote doesn't mean that we can't communicate. And we continue to build on our supervisory skills, and with a twist. Just on Monday, I spent a 3.5-hour Zoom call with my student worker where we met with our digital initiatives librarian to update the instances and folder information in our archive space instance. So we are going to be updating all of that over the summer. So then we my student worker and I stayed on the Zoom call where we each worked on an individual collection, but we were able to kind of talk each other through, hold each other's hands, because it's a little bit new to me too. So that's, I feel like that's something that I would never have thought of doing that before. So I'm exploring doing like some long-term Zoom calls where we're both working. And I'm getting a call, my time is up. So I'm going to say that's it. I want to thank my presenters. They've done a great job. I've learned a lot from them already. And I want to thank all of our audience for joining us. I hope you learned at least one little nugget today. Thank you.
Thanks, Anne. I appreciate it. Last is Janice Unger. Janice is presenting, and I love this, the Fast and the Furious Practicum Drift. So family. Janice Unger is a processing archivist at the Benson Ford Research Center at the Henry Ford. Janice, take it away.
Hello. As April mentioned, I'm Janice Unger, one of the processing archivists at the Henry Ford in Dearborn, Michigan. And like every other institution, COVID has brought many challenges to the Benson Ford Research Center. The majority of our staff was furloughed for 6 months. We lost some staff members due to retirement and layoffs, and we are currently working mostly from home. In the midst of this, we were asked by a local university if we would be able to host students for their winter archive practicums, as we had hosted on-site before. So for the first time, our practicum program would be drifting into the virtual world. Next slide, please. We received the email query on November 30th, and looking at the calendar, realized the first day of class was exactly 6 weeks later on January 11th. And while it was 6 weeks on the calendar, thanks to the holidays, we really only had 4.5 weeks to prepare. 2 of us, myself and my fellow processing archivist Hillary, agreed to supervise 1 student each. Next slide, please. Our first step was research. We knew remote programs already existed, so I started looking for information on virtual internships and bringing on remote workers. I found these 2 websites useful in providing insights into what should be done for a new employee or student who would only be working remotely. Next slide, please. I also located this webinar put on by QCM, which discussed remote museum internships. This webinar reinforced what I was gathering from websites, and it was beneficial to hear how successful remote programs have been at other institutions. Next slide. We came up with 3 main takeaways from the research. The first was to create good onboarding documents for the students, providing them with as much relevant information as we could. The second was to ensure the students felt welcome and a part of the archives and library team. The third was to replicate as much of the on-site experience as we could via the computer. Next slide, please. Our next step was to brainstorm ideas that could support those takeaways. Here are some of the ideas we came up with. Virtual coffee hours, videos on museum history and archival outreach, images of collections and possible video calls, a devoted area on Microsoft Teams, orientation and instructional videos, a student survey at the end of the semester, a virtual stacks tour, and a welcome video. While we knew we wouldn't be able to do every idea we came up with, it was a good place to start. Next slide. After brainstorming, we developed our plan of action, first determining our expectations for the students. Hillary and I decided that they should have regular check-ins with their supervisor, join department meetings if their schedules allowed, participate in chats with other department members on Teams, and complete the intellectual arrangement and description for 1 collection. The students had to complete 135 hours of work for the practicum, so if they finished processing the first collection and had leftover time, we could provide a second one. Next slide. Hillary and I also assembled the onboarding documents. Our welcome letter contained information on the practicum goals, working hours, check-in meetings, technical requirements and software, networking, a staff directory, the institution's social media policy, useful links, and more. We included an abridged copy of the processing procedure manual, which had been recently written for the museum's reaccreditation process. Also supplied were copies of the department's processing manual, which contained detailed step-by-step instructions for writing finding aids and our finding aid templates. Next slide. The next step was to locate collections that might work well for the students. We aimed for relatively small collections of a few boxes that contained a variety of 2D and 3D materials. We also wanted collections that wouldn't need too much physical arrangement when the students were done, as Hillary and I are only in the office for a few hours each week. The collections needed to be easy enough to photograph, as we had to image every folder and item in the collection for the students to flip through. The collection my student first worked on was 1.6 cubic feet and contained about 185 individual items, most of which were 2D. Next slide. We then determined what other activities we would include with this practicum. The first was a dedicated area on Microsoft Teams where we could post interesting library and archives information and provide a place for informal chatting with others in the department. Hillary and I also wanted to set up at least one virtual coffee hour to somewhat replicate having impromptu chats in the office. We decided to send out a survey at the end of the semester as well, asking for honest feedback to improve this program. Our students completed their practicums about 2 weeks ago, and we have had some time to reflect on how the program turned out. Next slide. Overall, Hillary and I felt the program went well, as did our students based on their surveys. It helped being honest up front about possible bumps in the road, of which there were a few. Sending images of the collection items allowed the students to peruse them at their own speed and retain them for future reference. Having realistic expectations prevented some stress on both ends. We worked with our students and found a check-in schedule that accommodated their commitments. And good onboarding documents were key. The students could refer to them and answer questions if they were working at night or on weekends when Hillary and I weren't on the clock. Next slide, please. So I realized during our virtual coffee hour that we should have done more prep work for it. I had forgotten to tell the students who would be attending, so it was hard for them to come up with questions on the spot. And I had also failed to prepare some extra questions to pepper into the conversation to keep it going, but we were able to make it work. We could have made the initial projects a little longer, and our survey results also bear this out. But since we weren't sure how fast the students would work, we felt it was better to start with slightly smaller collections so that at least one would be completed. Department meetings also ended up being a little tricky to coordinate, as both of the students worked full-time during the week, and their schedules could not always accommodate our set meeting times. Next slide. Two elements of the program need a greater amount of improvement in the future from our viewpoint. While the students felt the level of communication before the program started was sufficient, Hillary and I would like to have more time to get to know the students, their skills, and their interests beforehand. That way we could better tailor the experience to their interest or the outcomes they would like to get from the practicum. We also need to improve our use of Teams. Due to IT issues, it took a few weeks for the students to have access to the dedicated area we set up, and we did not provide the most clear instructions as to what we expected from the students there. Next slide, please. There are a few additions we would like to incorporate into future remote practicums. A virtual stacks tour would be the first, as being able to go behind the scenes is typically a highlight for on-site students. Hillary and I would also like to maintain a running list of possible projects so that we won't have to scramble to find collections next time. And based on the feedback from our students, we plan on utilizing some sort of tracking tools so that it's easier to see deadlines and tasks and to stay on schedule. We may also consider a short online presentation so the rest of the Historical Resources Department can learn what they worked on over the semester. Next slide. And thank you. If you have any questions or would like to see the onboarding documents we created, please feel free to contact me.
And that's it there at the end. Those are our contact emails if you'd like to contact any of us, and we'd be happy to talk to you. And I think we've just eked out a few minutes left to take questions if there's questions.
Danielle, you're on mute.
Thank you. Oh, that always, it's like a bingo chip. We do have a couple of minutes for questions, and the first one that I have is actually for Neal. Someone wanted to know what software or tools did students use to correct text blocks? The concern for projects like this is needing to provide student workers with paid software.
That's a great question. So for the text correction project, we did use a vendor hosted paid bit of software to do that project. And so that was one bit of privilege that we had to communicate out and scale up a very large project very quickly. We did also utilize a transcription text editing project as well that used several dozen documents that was word-based. That was another, I guess, lower cost project. So as an alternative, we did implement that for some other aspects of projects we worked on.
Great, thank you. Another question that we received, it looks like it could be for anyone. Do you see remote projects continuing, or is there pressure to get back into the office, the archives, the library?
I'll take a first stab and let everybody come in. Yes. So we, and I have to be honest, again, like I said, we just named our new 20th president today, and it's kind of a question, at least our current president and current administration really wants to be back in person for classes in the fall. As far as I'm concerned, I'm planning to do hybrid internships again. And a remote, if that student wants to do a remote, we'll certainly offer that and give them the opportunity. Our library has been very cognizant and very good about, keeping social distance. It's really just going to depend on the guidelines as they change this summer, and really what our new administration, our new president, where they're going to take us.
We actually at the Henry Ford have 2 new students working remotely this summer, one for our Simmons internship, and I have a new archives practicum student who started on Monday. And I think it is a good thing, because I ended up realizing a couple weeks into the last practicum that my student was in North Carolina. So it'll be a good way to help students who perhaps live in a more rural area who wouldn't have the opportunity to come work with us in Dearborn, Michigan, because it's not convenient to everybody.
And I would say, as a lone arranger who depends a lot on student work, one of the issues is depending on the level of training and experience that my student workers have had in the archives, remote projects can be useful for when I have to be out of the office for more than a day or two, just to keep them working, because they may not be able to be in the archives or get into the archive stacks without me. So for me, there's just kind of that everyday practical level. I can also see situations where I have an older student who is pregnant or has an extended medical problem where they can still perform some kind of work, but actually getting physically to the archives is difficult. I will just say, in one of my previous jobs, being able to work remotely for the last month of my pregnancy was a lifesaver, and I can definitely see a student needing to take advantage of that.
I can pop in quickly too. I think that at the Reuther we'll likely continue to do hybrid models, and similar to what other panelists are saying, it will also be based off of the student themselves. Wayne State University has a lot of non-traditional students, so a lot of our students are already working solely online, especially for the SIS program. I know a lot of that is online work. So ideally, we'll continue creating new types of remote projects that students can easily work on and participate in.
All right, thank you, everyone. I'm afraid we are actually out of time. We had 1 or 2 more questions, but that's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much, everyone, for the presentation. Thanks to all our presenters, and to everyone who attended today. We hope you enjoy the rest of your virtual MAC experience.